Oh, RebelCon's been fantastic. I think that, while we're in classes with the guys most of the time during the week, one of the things we're able to do here is we're actually able to interact with them. And, well, once you get to meet somebody in person, talk with them in person, the communication bandwidth increases. So this has been great. The people that I've met that are also trading, that I'm also in the Rebel pit with, and we are exchanging text messages back and forth, the camaraderie is just excellent. So I recommend anytime they have an in-person event, you got to come and attend.
Join us this December in Miami, Florida for Market Rebellion Live.
Have Clapper will travel.
That's the fact, Jack.
And travel a lot if you're John, because holy smokes, this guy, I'll tell you what, folks, if you don't know this guy, I tell you what, I think you got a lot of pilots beat on how many miles you're getting, John.
310,000 on Americans so far this year, Pete.
That ain't half bad. That's not
not half good either.
and let's be honest, it's not the only airline you fly. So I mean, you've probably got preference on just about every airline that exists.
Yeah, and that's only because Pete keeps the jet to himself.
That's right. I love it. Wait, what?
Yeah, because he doesn't like letting me take it down to Puerto Rico.
Sucker almost blew off of Florida. But anyway.
Well, welcome to the Rebel's Edge, folks. We always start off with 1 minute macro. If you want a lot more than that, of course, you can go over to many of the networks that'll bore you to death. But we only bore you with 1 minute. And today, Pete, that 1 minute is bang. Chinese lockdowns and people basically fighting off those lockdowns. That has the markets kind of spiraling, in particular, people with exposure to China. Even though they might unlock faster because of these protests, it still is not a good thing for the markets right now.
Well, John, it's causing a lot of delays, the manufacturing, and I think the biggest name out there in the world, of course, Apple, is one of those names that literally pointed right to that, what you were just talking about, some of these shutdowns and not just the lockdowns themselves and the restrictions themselves, but now you're finally starting to see some of this, the upheaval of people. They're pretty ticked off about this whole thing. So it certainly is interesting going through this whole thing. And I'll tell you what, from a macro perspective, this is as macro as it gets because of everything that China is to the rest of the world. And that's what I think is happening right now. What else is happening right now? Well, my brother John looks like he lost his signal. I'm sure he'll be back in a sec. So I'm going to start it off. We're going to give you APE. Now, this is an AMC created APE, which is really interesting. John, I'll let you take it. I was just starting it off and talking about how Amazon wants to compete with the big boys in the film studio world, and tell us about the APE and what's going on there. Oh, well, I'm told he's not back yet, but he's kind of back yet. He'll be back in there in just a minute. But anyway, you go back, John, there's the acquisition of MGM. That certainly is something that definitely plays into this. By the way, how lucrative are these theaters? Well, a lot better than a lot of people think. But, when you combine a lot of different aspects of what's going on, when you look at Top Gun Maverick, that's a great example. It went into the theaters first, but when it did finally go on to the next level, they were number one in the digital space. So that's, I think, where we're going to and where we've come from when it comes to the theaters world. There you are, John. I see you coming back. So you can take it from here, but streaming and the transition and the expansion into theaters is becoming a little bit more of something that people are willing to embrace.
Yeah, but the problem is, Pete, that any movie that they make now, like you said, they've got MGM, they bought that studio and the catalog. That's great. But for them to start putting movies out in the theaters, theatrical release, it'll take them a couple of years, Pete, to do that. And the question is whether APE is still around in a couple of years, because it just went from $11 down to $1. just basically in the last couple months.
And John, real quick on this one, just to finish it up, what's your guess? How long do these guys have? Because I got a number in my head, but what do you think at this point in the game where it's dropped, like you said, from $11 to $1? I mean, first of all, I don't know why it survives at all, but you tell me, does it have any time left, or how much time is left, I should say?
Sure. I think they'll probably reorganize under bankruptcy, Pete. Quite frankly, I mean, we just saw that today with BlockFi, and you and I were talking about it on the crypto side. There's no reason you're not going to see AMC or any of these theater chains potentially do that same thing. Just basically shed a bunch of debt and reemerge. And if they do that, Pete, they're probably worth a lot more than they are right now.
We have to keep an eye on that.
Yep. Now, what about Taboola? This is an interesting one because this one jumped like 60% early on. Now it's holding on to a very significant gain anyway. But what happened basically is Yahoo said, you know what? We're going to take their AI, artificial intelligence generated ad, because that's what they do. They figure out what you've been looking at, and then they basically present ads to you through the Yahoo platform. They've also been doing it for BuzzFeed, but now Yahoo, Pete's going to own 25% of this company, and they have a 30-year deal with TBLA.
Here's what I got for you, though, John. Tell me where I'm wrong on this one. This was a $2 billion company a year ago, give or take, very close to a $2 billion market cap. Here it is trading at 400 million on the spike that we're getting right now. So riddle me this one, Batman. Why on God's green earth, if I'm Yahoo, and we know Yahoo's got some deep pockets, and they're looking at this thing, they started off the year, by the way, this Taboola, it was 675. It hit 150, and today it's trading 275. Why wouldn't you just buy it outright? Why 25%? I don't even understand why you wouldn't just say, you know what? We'll take this whole daggone thing right now at 400 mil. Be done with it. It's not even a worry, and it factors in, and you're keeping it away from others as well. So you're really pulling something here. Why wouldn't you do that?
I think that is the next step. I think, Pete, they probably have the contracts with, a whole bunch of other companies right now to serve those ads, and maybe they want to figure out how do we make it exclusive just to us. And the fact now that they own 25%, some of those other companies might not be as comfortable knowing that Yahoo owns 25% of Taboola. So I would look for that to happen, to your point, probably for somewhere between where it is now, 600 mil, up to $1 billion. I think that's somewhere where we'll probably see a deal over the next 12 months, Pete, but not right away. Gotcha. All right. What about AXSM? This is AXSM Therapeutics, and these guys have a treatment that basically keeps you from getting this delayed relapse when you're taking this various Alzheimer's medicine and so forth. We know that, it was Biogen IDEC, Pete, that took a little bit of a hit today, not because of this necessarily, but they took a little bit of a hit, even though they've got the best Alzheimer's treatment out there right now. But this is one of the side effects that people want to deal with, and apparently this one can, and that's why AXSM jumped over 30% today.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable thing that they're working on, John, here. They've got a very deep pipeline as well. A lot of stuff right now. They've got 3-4 drugs in the stage 3 area, phase 3 in their pipeline. By the way, usually you're going to point this out. I'm going to point this one out, John. How about the 8 million shares that are trading today when normally they're trading about 1.2 million per day? So you can tell that there's a heck of a lot of interest in this one. There's a lot of volume going on here. The improvements they show, and they have it at the 2-week and the 5-week mark, are absolutely outstanding. Any of us and all of us should be pretty excited about what we're seeing in a company that's that deep into the phase 1 to phase 2, phase 3. They're in phase 3. Now it's just a time for approval time. And I'll tell you what, they're also not having too many events that are negative, John, when they're looking at what these people are taking and ingesting. That's also an important thing. It's not just how well does it work, but what kind of side effects might there be that are negative. They're not seeing much there either, which is a really good thing. So I think this whole story is unbelievably great. I think this is a company that I sure wish I knew a little bit more of not too long ago, because I love what they're doing, John. In that space, we know that is where the money is. I mean, if you can get something in the Alzheimer's world as a company, I'm talking just financially, not just for the great treatment that they do, but financially, this is worth an incredible amount of money. So it might not be at its peak right now at a 31% gain today.
Yeah, and Pete, for the year, it's up basically 100%
Yeah.
from December 31st through today so far. So 94% is what I saw this morning, and that's pretty enviable in this market these days. And like you say, this is a big stock. It's not just some fly-by-night penny stock that has one treatment. They have several. All right, let's take a look, Pete, at CS First Boston. I know they're going to go back to that name because Credit Suisse is just circling the drain. And a new 52-week low, multi-year low today. Their bonds are basically imploding. We're going to see everybody buying, the one-strike puts and all that kind of stuff because sometimes it's cheaper to insure against bankruptcy by owning those puts than it is by owning the swaps, Pete.
Yeah, John, we've been seeing this kind of playing out for a number of not just months, but years. We've seen a lot of these European banks that have struggled. Even when our banks are doing very, very well, we see a lot of struggling across the globe. CS, this one, definitely one of those leaders hitting these new lows, as you just said. And I'll tell you what, John, when they talk about massive outflows, boy, is there anything worse than hearing those words? I mean, that's pretty terrible. And then they're talking about restructuring, and you were just talking about, you said CS Boston. Well, you know what? First Boston, that's probably not that far away at this point in time because they just continue to go lower and lower and lower, and the drain's not looking too good right now for these guys.
No, and these guys had big exposure to Archegos. That was that blow up that happened. It also affected, I think, Morgan Stanley, but to a much lesser degree, Pete.
Yeah.
But a lot of people took heat on that one. Credit Suisse, like Pete said, folks, pretty close to a run on the bank right now when the biggest depositors in that bank are basically saying, give me my money back, give me my money back. They eventually you run out of that. You got to stop the run on the bank. And that's what they're facing right now. All right, let's take a second, Pete, to talk about unusual activity. I've got some in XLE. This is, as you might imagine, you can usually take the last letter. If it starts with X, whatever it ends in is usually part of what it is a spider for. In other words, they have somewhere between 7 and 10 different stocks in each of these spiders. And in this case, it's the Energy Select Spider. They're buying the end of December, the 30th of December, 85 puts. And that's with the XLE trading 89.5, Pete. So as bad as it looks today in the energy space, they're saying maybe it gets worse. I got to think that we're nearing pretty close to a bottom here, Pete, for energy. But I've been surprised before, and I'm surprised that we're breaking down this far today.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, John. And maybe it's a little bit of a protection they're looking for right now based on, have they hit, the lows, or is there further to go? It could be more on the protection side for that. It'd be interesting to just watch this pan out because we started the day, John, crude was getting absolutely slapped. And then it made a nice little bounce off of like 74 back up towards 76, 77, somewhere in there. That's what I think is part of like what you're talking about. Have we maybe bottomed? Maybe. Or are they, do you want to have that little bit of protection down there? So interesting to watch when you see the energy space. We know how volatile that's been. I got one for you, John, that's not necessarily been volatile, but they've sold it and sold it and sold it. Amazon.
All right.
Now, we are not too far off of like multi-year lows right now. The lows being closer to the mid 80s, but here we are in the mid 90s. But we got a buyer out there. A matter of fact, a decent sized buyer for this week looking for something to maybe bump to the upside. Is it something to do with, Cyber Monday, something like that, or what is it? But in any case, it looks like if we get any kind of a turn later in the week, because it sure doesn't look like we're going to get it today, 16,000 of the 95 calls that expire on Friday were bought. They were bought between $1.50 and about $2.50. Last I looked, they were still trading somewhere close to about $2, John. And the reason that is, folks, is they started buying before the stock got up to the levels where it was 95, 75. They bought before that. The stock started to move to the upside. They continued to buy. So started at $1.50, moved all the way up to 260. There's still some that's about where the level is right now. But we look at this company, John. They've got those job out, the cutbacks that they're talking about 10,000 jobs likely to get cut. They're also talking about India and some of the failures that they've had over there. So this could be kind of a washout time frame, maybe for Amazon. We'll see. But there's a lot to play out. I like these calls enough. I own these calls, John. I'll have to watch them very closely to see if they hit some of our levels where you and I both either want to cut them or take half off or whatever. But we still got 4.5 more days once we get through today.
Yep. I do like it though, Pete, because one big headline between now and Friday, and it'll probably come tomorrow, if not later today, about how well Cyber Monday went, could pop this stock through 96, 97. And if it does, then those calls you talked about, Pete, double or triple, depending how fast we go. That's one of those things that I think is, I think the odds favor you being long that one.
Yep. I like it. All right, John, we're going to jump to sports.
Yep. Let's go over to sports, Pete, and talk a little bit about your favorite, the Chico. That's Ron Rivera's team, the Washington Commanders.
Yeah.
And looking a lot better these days.
Yeah. For a team that was kind of basically buried early on, they've been digging themselves out of that burial plot now, John, for a while. It's pretty cool to watch because Ron Rivera, our good buddy, he's been running this team very well. We know he was a defensive guy. This guy was one of the best linebackers, if you didn't know it, in Pac-12. And then in the NFL, he did a great job with the Chicago Bears for a long time. He's been coaching ever since. That defense, John, is the key to what's going on right now with the Washington Commanders. They've won 6 of the last 7 games. Now, the schedule's kind of interesting as well, John. They're going to play the Giants back-to-back with a bye in between. So they're going to play the Giants, and then you got to bye, and then you got to play the Giants again. But the good news is that's in their division. And by the way, they finish up with the Dallas Cowboys. So if they can get a little bit of something, some mojo running, these guys might have a shot at the playoffs. I mean, playoffs. They're 7-5, John. They have a great opportunity to get a little bit further. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is the defense, though. The last 7 games, they're giving up on average about 16 points. Now, if that was throughout the entire season, they'd be ranked number 2 right now in the NFL. Gives you a little bit of an idea of the level at which their defense is playing. Chase Young is likely to come back pretty soon, John, as well. That would be something great to see him back out on the field for this defense as well. What do you think of the Commanders? They got a shot? Well, maybe John's not able to hear me right now. I'm going to say they do have a shot. So next up, we're going to go to a little bit of college football. And what we're going to hit here on the college football side of things is this. Who is the best team that's going to miss the playoff most likely? And it's an interesting question because that all got shifted around in a big way this past week because of how some of those games actually panned out. Ohio State at home, losing to Michigan, and they didn't just lose. They got slapped around pretty good in that loss. Michigan, in a rivalry game like that, you can only imagine how high those guys were, how excited they were, and they absolutely dominated the game. Michigan's now moved up to number 2. Georgia's still sitting at number 1 very comfortably. And then you've got TCU that continues to win. They had an absolute dominant game this past week. But then there's USC. And a lot of guys, John and I have been talking about this one for quite some time. USC has been sitting there, and all they've done is win. They had the one loss to Utah, at Utah, in an absolute shootout. They lost by 1 point. Other than that, that offense cannot be stopped. The quarterback, Caleb Williams, if you've not watched a kid play this year, if you watch that game, you saw the Heisman Trophy winner. That's hands down. He is the Heisman Trophy winner. And if they get past Utah, John, in this playoff or championship game, which is going to be in Vegas, by the way, that's kind of fun. If they get by them in that game, John, I'll tell you what, it's going to be a whole lot of fun when you take a look at what's going on in that final grouping of 4. But who's the team that should have been there or could have been there, and then they just unfortunately stayed outside of it, John? My name is still going to be Alabama. They lost to Tennessee on the road by 3. They lost to LSU on the road by a point, by that 2-point conversion. I look at that team and I just think to myself, it's amazing how close they were to being undefeated themselves. They do have those 2 losses, but so what do you think? How do you like USC getting in there, and do they deserve to be in there on top of Ohio State now, who now falls out?
I do think they do deserve to be in there ahead of them, Pete.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked about it beginning of the season. What you can't do is lose at the end. If you lose at the end, whether it's in your divisional championship or whether it's, to a late loss to a rival like Ohio State just lost to Michigan, whatever it is, if you lose late, you're going to drop. And the question is, do the other guys ahead of you drop so that you can catch them? Or is it just that you've fallen out? I think Ohio State fell out. And just like you say, I would rather see Bama in there than them, even though they've got those 2 losses, because this was pretty much just you lost big at home in to your biggest rival. So you can't survive that and come back and make a claim to the top 4, I don't think. Like you said, I would rather see Bama. I wouldn't even mind, Pete, seeing Washington, because I think that team's really been playing pretty tough lately.
Yeah, it's really interesting, John, because what if? There's always the what ifs, right? What if TCU, who they struggled with Kansas State, and then in the fourth quarter or second half, they really took over, they took command, and they won that game. That's who they've got to play in the Big 12 championship game. So let's say they get beat. What if USC loses again to Utah? Could happen. They already lost once. Maybe it could happen again. And the quarterback for Utah, by the way, in that game, Johnny, threw 2 touchdowns, ran for 3 touchdowns. You talk about a kid who just had the game of his life in the biggest game that he'd ever played in. That's pretty impressive. And even though I don't think it will happen, Michigan and Purdue can throw the daggone rock, and they can put points up on just about anybody. And we've seen games, and we just saw it with the Vikings, right? They go out, they beat Buffalo, they come back, and they get scorched 40-3 by Dallas. It's not totally out of the possibility that Michigan could stumble against Purdue. But if we start getting all of that, boy, does that get interesting on who gets up in there. Obviously, Ohio State pops right in there right away. But, then you kind of wonder. It's not going to probably be LSU because they'll probably have another loss with Georgia. But it gives the opportunity to teams like you just mentioned, Washington, and maybe some others that have a couple losses, but their losses were earlier, and it gives them a chance to maybe get in there. It could be really fun.
Yeah, well, and I love that the top 3 are all undefeated, Pete.
Yep.
Because if they can hold on and maintain that, that's going to be an exciting playoff.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, make sure you tune in tomorrow, folks, 1 p.m. Eastern time for the Rebels Edge. I think we have 2 tickets remaining, Jared. I'm not even sure of that for next week, the 8th through the 10th of December down in Miami. If you want to try to join us, marketrebellion.com/Miami. If you want to join us, like I say, I think there are 2 tickets left right now. marketrebellion.com/Miami. Bang.
Bang.
We'll see you tomorrow, folks, 1 p.m. Eastern.